doing with the models. And from my perspective, the way I think about this is, what is the leader going to do exactly with this information? Is this basically saying, the way I'm taking this, is this saying that we're going to have a shift towards more small language models and more tailored models? That's why we care, or what? That's what I'm trying to digest from an article like this is, what would the typical AI leader, like if I'm leading an AI organization, what am I going to do specifically with this user information? So I'm optional.
Okay, optional. What do you think here, Tim?
I think this is more important than that. And I'll tell you as an AI leader why I think it's important, because brand value and the emphasis that a particular product puts on this kind of stuff could be important over time. So there's a million caveats, but I'm glad to see somebody doing some research about this. I don't see much else, at least not at this level of detail. And, you can argue with methods and how well this all works, but this is important for customers putting robots out there to answer directly customer-facing queries and stuff. The likelihood that it's going to do something that's going to crater your brand reputation is pretty important. So this to me is important for that reason, that you be aware of this stuff. I wish, as I've said a million times, we would fund this as aggressively as we fund the development of the models themselves, because I think it's a crucial issue, but at least they're making an effort. And I think this was a good effort. I can criticize it, but it's a reasonable effort.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I had it as important or even essential. And Amanda, in terms of what they're going to do with it, I think it's understanding what are the values that are being promoted and whatever the dialogues are with customers. And I think this is going to be an area that's going to get very, very hotly contested in time. The first thing that I'm a Harvard graduate, so I've been seeing these responses by Harvard to the Trump administration's, desires to interfere with the governance of the institution. And what immediately popped to mind is, what would be the, if the current administration or a future administration disagreed with the values of this, what would that executive order look like, coming down to saying, oh, you're promoting, hey, we really don't think that, gratitude is a good personal emotion. We think that, common good or selfishness is better. So we'd like to crank that more in your answers. So anyway, I thought it was important, at least. Where are you on this, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to amplify what Tim said. It's definitely important. I think the key thing is much more, John, where you're talking about the brand representation here. And for AI leaders to teach your executives to think about this not as a deterministic, typical tool. Here's a point of sale system in my 5,000 stores at Swipe, and much more like, here's 5,000 employees. They have personalities, they have certain traits, and they're moldable, and they're very different here. And I think particularly as we move more towards this world where increasingly we're seeing evidence where certainly Gen Z is much more comfortable, and many others are getting information from AI robots for healthcare, for product information, professional services here. So the robot interface to my customer is going to really important, and it's very moldable. It's much more like humans with all these different aspects. So in that aspect, important.
Yep. All right. I'm going to give this an important, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a rebirth of moral philosophy in a way we haven't seen for probably 100 years, because we're going to get at this in an interesting way. All right. Ankaj, welcome. Can you give us the next article, or you want me to?
Just sharing my screen, John.
Gotcha.
Yes.
All right.
So the next one that we have comes from Boston Consulting Group and talks about GenAI in procurement, from buzz to bottom line cost reductions.
Yes. Can I just vote that I really hate the new format BCG has, where you scroll through and it comes up and so forth. But anyway, Amanda.
Agreed.
+1, John. They've done poor user testing on that. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, well, whatever. What?
Of course, we're all old white men, so maybe it's just us.
I don't know. Let's ask Amanda. Do you like?
Yeah, I don't know if I love that format either, but as far as, when I first clicked into it, I was like, what is this? I don't know if I can even go through this, but it's fine. So for me, this one, I deviate away from my optional on this one, and I'd say this one's at least important. There's case study in here. I do feel like there is information in here that's easier to digest, talks a little bit about procurement, high impact, things like this, and some steps that the leaders can take, a little bit about success metrics. So I feel like there is some more meat in here. And I don't think build versus buy, that conversation is necessarily going away anytime soon either, even though, we've been hearing this now for how long. So I'd rate this one important.
All right. I was leaning toward optional. I hear you. I was on the fence. What do you think here, Tim?
Yeah, I was on the optional camp in this one. It's they cite these statistics, but not with any real understanding of how they derive them. This 15 to 45% savings or something like that. And the other thing about this is another one of those things, hearkening back to the Jay Kingley, Tim Andrews model of economics. This is something everybody's going to do. In fact, they talk about one of the reasons to do it is because your suppliers are going to do it, so you better keep pace. So that's one of these things that if everybody adopts it, does anybody benefit? Unclear. But people will spend a lot of money and time chasing after it, and there will be some advantage because it's not an even, everybody doesn't adopt it on the same day. But at the end of the day, it's not clear there's any real advantage here to me.
Yeah, the answer is if everybody adopts it, if there's a lot of if you have a price inelastic good, as people are going to buy it anyway, no matter what the price, then the investors benefit. And again, Tim, if you could mute your thing when you're not talking, that'd be great. If it's an elastic good and not an oligopoly, that's holding price, then the consumer benefits. So I do think there's benefit. It's either the investor or the consumer or some combo.
Good point. Yes, but it's not clear that the firms that invest in this, they may have to, but I would be wary of promised returns.
Yes. Yeah. The world's a dynamic place. Who knew? Okay. We're going to give this one. Sorry, Amanda, I hope you're okay. We're going to go optional on this one.
John, before you go to the next article, Amanda, I think there's 2 new show spinoffs from this. I think there's a Women in AI news show, and I think there's an Angry Old White Man news show that we can highlight.
I like it.
It reminds me of one of my favorite websites I haven't been to in forever is oldjewstellingJokes.com, right? Anyway, which is absolutely hilarious. Anyway, all right, next.
So the next one that we have comes from LangChain, and they tell us how to think about agent frameworks.
Yeah, this is a rather long article by LangChain. It talks about a number of things here, and I was going to rate this as important. It's what I like about it is it gives a good overview of a number of important ideas. So it says, hey, you don't want to mix up agent abstractions and orchestration frameworks. So I thought that was kind of cool. I think the notion that context control is absolutely critical. That most successful, they make an important distinction between workflows and agents. And this comes out of the Anthropic definition of agents, which basically says, look, if you have a predetermined path of activity, it's a workflow. If you don't, it's an agent. And this notes that most successful systems are a blend of agents and workflows. They have this kind of fun thing. It might be known to folks, but it's new to me, which is it's kind of cutesy language that talks about important powerful tools take time to learn. And the way they talk about it is floor and ceiling. So if you have a low floor that is easy to learn and low ceiling, that means you have a tool that easy to learn, doesn't do much. High floor, high ceiling, interesting, you have to spend time learning it. Our mutual friend Tim and I have Alan Kay would say, look, there's no powerful tool that doesn't take time to learn, whether it's language or a pipe organ or whatever, mathematics. But anyway, so I thought this was a nice overview, a little wordy. They should have stuck it in a robot to make the language better, but I was going to give it an important. What do you think here, Amanda?
Yeah, Dr. John, I agree with you on this one, that it's important. I liked it was talking about some of the trade-offs within there, like simplicity versus flexibility, predictability versus autonomy, short-term demos, production reliability. There was a couple things I pulled out when I read through it. So, and I think it's a nice read because, coming from LangChain at any time, they could get very technical on us. So I liked it because I think everybody can kind of read and digest it. So I landed on important.
Yeah, Ankash, you have some insight into the provenance of this particular article. You want to just talk about it?
Yeah, John, seems like the OpenAI recently published a detailed PDF on agents. And Harrison Chase, founder of LangChain, he had some thing to say about it. And then he wrote this article. He shared this on Twitter as well. So just the origination of this one.
Gotcha. So he just looked across at OpenAI and said, "Look, you guys are screwing this up. Let me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I had some challenges, and I will go with important, but I would probably mark this article optional because at the end of the day, it's a defensive article and a marketing article for LangChain, and both of those really turned me off because it is a response to, oh, our agent framework is better than your agent framework, and while there are some good points, as you said, they're not new points. In fact, one of Alan's many famous quotes, Alan Kay, was simple things should be simple, but complex things should be possible. And that's exactly what he was talking about, was the floors and ceiling argument. It's a long time argument with systems. And I can argue even with some of what they say in terms of the technical content of it, because it's basically all saying, oh, this is our agentic framework. And by the way, that's what we make and sell, and it's perfect. I really have problems with articles like that. They really need to learn how to write marketing articles that are a little bit more objective.
All righty. So what do you think, Paul? We had for optional or important on this bad boy?
Yeah, no, I'm 1,000% with Tim. This feels like was assigned a product marketing person, and that's what they came out. I do want to highlight, though, that, and Tim or man, I'm kind of curious thing. I do think it's really important to get the language right on this, and I think if you even look at our learning lab last night on the agent protocol, it just gets so confusing. And for me, I prefer that the word workflow stays agnostic to the technology and not say this is a workflow and that's agent. To me, there's workflows, which is a task that needs to be done to get a business objective. Sometimes they're deterministic or if then rule based, and sometimes they're agent based. But that's a sidelight to optional for this article, though.
Yeah, I feel like all this talk is a red herring, John, like you've said for a long time about, what's intelligence and this, that, and the other thing. It's helpful if you're defining a technical framework because you need to have more of an engineering mindset a little bit. And so you need some definition. But beyond that, my definition is agents have agency. Look it up in the dictionary, folks. And or if you want a slightly more technical definition, then yes, there was something in there. I can't remember whether it was OpenAI or Anthropic that said they can react and dynamically change their decisions while they're working. Okay, that's agency, almost in a pure definition. And but at the end of the day, what matters is how well does it work? How reliable is it? Can you get things done with it? Those are the questions that really count. And whether you call it workflow or agentic, I did like Andrew Ning's comment that it's more of a spectrum than a particular definition. But if you want to create an API, you need some definitional boundaries. So when you want to create an API, you worry about it. If you're not creating an API, use what works.
All righty, we're heading for optional. Optional it is. Next, Ankaj.
Well said, Tim.
Yep. The next one comes from CSO Magazine and talks about when AI moves beyond human oversight, the cybersecurity risks of self-sustaining systems.
Yeah, it's talking about, it's very hard to implement security when the system can begin to adjust itself. What did you think of this, Amanda?
So for me, I'm optional on this one because I don't think there's a lot of information in this necessarily for the leader. I think it's a little strange. Anytime I hear anything that's kind of going towards like things are going to be doing things on their own completely, I'm a little, my eyes, like I said the other day, kind of glaze over. So I'm more on the optional side of this.
Yeah, I was heavy duty optional. I thought it was kind of stating the obvious. If stuff changes, it's going to be different. Anyway, what you think here, Tim?
Yeah, I was super optional on this, having delved in security a little bit here and there and having some relatives in the business, because the big example he gives, which is the CrowdStrike, Cloudflare rather, is whatever it was. Cloudflare is a product, I think. The thing that brought down the internet a little while ago had nothing to do with AI. It's like completely unrelated. So yeah, super optional in my mind.
All right, Paul, we're headed for optional. No problem with that, right? Oh, Paul's gone. All right. Nope. All right. Optional it is. Ankaj, last article, please.
Okay, the last one that we have for today talks about sleep time compute.
Yeah, sleep time compute. I thought this was kind of cutesy, basically using using cycles when, the compute is available, and also creating an architecture that allows you both to have an interactive current dialogue with this versus, have it in a stateless way, to creating a sustained state of the problem or the model and running it when compute's available. What do you think here, Tim?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. It's probably optional at the end of the day. It's really just a product announcement from this company, Letta. But it's an interesting idea. It could be really important because, again, there's a lot of idle time on a lot of computers. In fact, we always used to joke that the biggest supercomputer in the world was all the idle time on all the people's devices in the world, which is still the case. The question is, how do you take advantage of it? This is still looking at a kind of centralized, let the model think while it's not doing anything else.
Yeah.
You do have to trust, because you have to give it the persistent memory of what it's reorganizing. But it could be quite powerful, I think. But it's early days. This is a limited version of it, and it's a product announcement. So I'd probably give it an optional.
Amanda, where are you on this?
Yeah, I agree with Tim on this one, that I feel like it's more of a product announcement, and it is interesting as well. But yeah, I'm optional.
All right. I love the title, sleep time thinking, whatever, which is kind of fun. They don't call it dreaming. All right. So optional it is. I'm comfortable with that. Ankaj, if you give us a total. We had a really interesting discussion last night about, the different ways to think about the agentic frameworks. And I thought, Ashish did a great job of laying out the MCP versus agent to agent versus Nanda, the MIT inspired decentralized computing. So anyway, interesting stuff going on. Anything else? Any announcements or anything? Amanda, Tim? All right, today we almost had a complete no-hitter. We have one important, values in the wild, and the rest optional. So late reading day for our AI leader. Look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Paul. Bye-bye now.